So in other words, they need to disclose to people. I mean, if they were honest, if they wanted to give people the correct impression about what this money is about, they'd have to let you know that the Federal Reserve stands ready to create money without limit. And these are Mr. Greenspan's words, and he said this many times, not just one time. This little book that I wrote about him, What Does Mr. Greenspan Really Think? You can get it from Barnes & Noble, or it's a free download off the FAME website. Several times he said that the Federal Reserve stands ready to create money without limit. So if you and I say we're partners in some small business, and the business issued each of us, say, 50 shares of stock, so we're 50-50 owners, but I have the right to issue additional shares in unlimited quantities to my friends, I could dilute you down to zero. And that's exactly what's happening, folks. So people who have saved or have promises of future payment, pensions, annuities, or whatnot, the money being created, in effect, depreciates their ownership. And even people like Madison, James Madison, when he was president of the country, pointed out that the fact that the paper money is really a violation of property rights. In other words, you're stealing people's savings. So this is another thing that really needs to be disclosed right on the bills. So if you want to do proper disclosure, you have to show people right up front, not in some esoteric way where they have to go search on the internet to find this out. And this is not being done. Let's go to the next slide, please. They would have to disclose also that the creation of these new dollars flat out of thin air has depreciated the dollar's purchasing power by more than 90% since 1950. Come back to me, please. Who's even mindful of the fact, I mean, they talk about inflation at 2%. This is nonsense. I mean, anybody who's in the real world knows that the money is depreciating something in the order of 8-10% a year. And I have showed you in prior programs the studies put together by John Williams of Shadow Government Statistics, where he showed that this consumer price index methodology, the way they actually compute it, has been changed 4 times since the Clinton years. And in fact, the money is being depreciated maybe 8-10% a year. Let's go to the next slide, please. They would need to disclose as well, if they were going proper disclosure, that dollars are in no way obligations of the U.S. government. So sometimes you hear this notion that dollars have the full faith and credit of the United States government. The signatures of the Secretary of the Treasury and the Treasurer are gratuitous. Come back to me, please. So if you look at your bills and you see those signatures on them and whatnot, that's part of the design. I mean, the government is not promising to do anything. I mean, the government has really almost nothing to do with this. This has all been delegated to the banking system, and the banking system is robbing people blind. Let's go to the next slide, please. They would have to disclose, in order to do full disclosure, that dollars are just tokens. They're paper tickets. Come back to me, please. So in other words, it's not even real money. It's like play money, except they made it legal tender. And the fact that it's legal tender means that if you don't accept it, you don't have to be paid. So if I owe you, or if we have a dispute and it's adjudicated in a court, the court is going to award the aggrieved party damages in the legal tender. And so the legal tender, which again is created flat out of nothing, it may have no value whatsoever, that's the stuff that's used. Mr. Greenspan, by the way, in a letter to Ron Paul, now running for president, actually stated that as long as we have fiat money, arbitrary, irredeemable paper ticket money, we have to have legal tender. Let's go to the next slide, please. I've already covered this slide. Go to the next slide, please. This is the one where I talked about the money creation going from 150 billion to 12 trillion. Go to the next slide, please. Here's another disclosure they would need to make, that the United States government has extended roughly $7 trillion in guarantees, mostly to government-sponsored entities. These are people like Fannie Mae or Ginnie Mae. And should these guarantees be called, then there's risk that significant amount of additional dollars will have to be created, thereby diluting the purchasing power of dollars that have been saved or promised for future payment, such as pensions. Come back to me, please. So in other words, the promise, the guarantees that the government makes, these are not properly disclosed. Who even knows about these guarantees? And in fact, in addition to the guarantees to companies like Fannie Mae and Ginnie Mae and whatnot, they have guaranteed the entire balance sheet of the banking system. So the bank's assets are systemically guaranteed by the so-called lender of last resort, which is really not a lender, it's just a bailout. And that bailout window is open today, folks. And they can accept as collateral and change into money rotten bananas if they want. I mean, anything they want, they can change into money, and they will change into money. And this fellow Bernanke, who runs the Federal Reserve, for whatever reason, he is not mindful of how this depreciates the savings and the purchasing power of seniors and people who are on pensions. And people who have retired on annuities and whatnot. These people are getting cheated by this system. Now let's go to the next slide, please. And this is really the most significant threat which really needs to be disclosed, and that is the so-called rocket scientists on Wall Street, through financial innovation, have created something like $400+ trillion in derivatives. Derivatives are just bets. Come back to me, please. Now, of this 400 plus in derivatives, and I have a chart to show this. Why don't we put the chart up? It's the next slide. Of this 400 plus trillion, and this chart ends in 2006. It shows about 380, but it's north of 400 today. Of those derivatives, roughly 130 trillion is in United States banks, and of that 130 trillion, 125 trillion is in 3 banks. Come back to me, please. And those 3 banks are J.P. Morgan Chase, Citibank, and Bank America. Now, what does this mean, derivative bets? These are just gambling. As a matter of fact, if you read the financial press, like the Financial Times or whatnot, they actually refer to these derivatives as bets. These bets are all off balance sheet. So in the event that the banks win these bets, and they win them a lot, they get to keep the money. Should something go wrong, then you pay. How do you pay? Well, the Federal Reserve stands ready to bail these banks by creating money without limit, which means anything that's denominated in dollars will become depreciated. I don't know how people buy into this, and I don't understand how our so-called, actually I do understand, but I don't like it, how our so-called elected representatives let this get by them. How people like Mr. Schumer now, who's complaining bitterly about the plight of the people who got sucked into these subprime mortgages, how come he's on the Senate Banking Committee? Why doesn't he say something about this business, the risk the money will be depreciated to zero? And what is the contingency plan for the Federal Reserve and for the Treasury in the event, I should say, when this actually occurs? And the answer is de facto martial law. And as I speak, there is now on the White House website a national security directive which in effect gives the president plenipotentiary power in the event of what they call a national catastrophe. And among the catastrophes that they're concerned about is an economic catastrophe. And right at the bottom of the list of all these economic catastrophes is if people lose confidence in the financial system. If people lose confidence in the financial system. Well, let me tell you, folks, the only reason people lose confidence in the financial system is because it doesn't deserve their confidence. And it is, in fact, it is corrupt, it is dishonest. They are cheating ordinary people out of their savings, out of their promises of future payment, and it is really disgusting. And the bottom line here, the point I want to make is that this violates the Genevas Das Commandment in Jewish law. Jewish law condemns this kind of behavior, and anybody who's Jewish, or especially people who are observant Jews, should take note of this. Well, I'm right down at the end, and this concludes my 3-part presentation on how the monetary system violates Jewish law. It's been a real honor and privilege to come into your homes to present to you on this. Thank you very much.